Hey guys, welcome to the show where we are helping Christians build profitable businesses of eternal significance and thereby have a redemptive economic impact locally. Hey, thanks for joining me. My name is mhatch. I am your host. Today I will be sharing a talk that I gave at Grove City College to their cryptocurrency and blockchain class. It was a lot of fun interacting with the students there and chatting about, of course, Bitcoin, but also cryptocurrencies in general. But the title of the talk was The Redemptive Value of Bitcoin, where I laid out the biblical case for Bitcoin being an honest weight and measure. And that's something I've said on the show over and over again, that I believe Bitcoin is the only monetary protocol that abides by God's mandate for just weights and measures, making it an honest money or an honest weight and measure. Hey, a quick heads up, if you're listening to this as a podcast right now, I want to let you know that there are visuals involved with this presentation, and you can go to the YouTube channel, the Redemptive Economics YouTube channel, to see the visuals in addition to the audio side of this presentation. It may help to put the pieces together a little bit better for you. So I would recommend you doing that. The YouTube version will post this Monday, June 23rd. So you can either listen through this whole podcast and then go check out the YouTube version, or maybe push pause on this and just go over to YouTube and watch that once it posts this Monday. Now, as you'll hear me talk about in this message, it takes a lot of time to understand Bitcoin, and I don't expect to sway some of you, especially if you're skeptical, in this one 30 to 40 minute message that I gave at Grove City College. My hope, though, is that this might cause you to look into it further, that you might do more research to try to understand Bitcoin more, because in my opinion, it's worth it. It has been for me, and it's been that way for many other Christians who have eventually come after studying it for many hours, hundreds of hours in some cases, but it has been for many Christians who've decided to adopt it and embrace it. In the meantime, just a reminder, we are in the midst of a 12-week or 12-part digital course entitled The Redemptive Enterprise, 15 Biblical Principles to Build a Profitable Business of Eternal Significance. There is a link in the show notes that you can go to register for the course for just $25 for the entire course. When you do register, you'll have the ability, if you so choose, to join the live sessions every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, although you don't have to attend those in order to take in the course itself. I will release new sessions every week. After we record that live session on Wednesdays, you'll have access to all of that and the other resources that are included. We just finished session 6, so this upcoming Wednesday, June 25th, will be session 7. And man, I would love for you to join us. Also, lastly, if you have any feedback or questions about any of the content that I've produced on this podcast, I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at mhatch@redemptiveeconomics.com. I would love to hear from you. All right, gang, we're going to go ahead and jump into this week's episode, which is a recording of my presentation to the cryptocurrency and blockchain course at Grove City College, which I entitled The Redemptive Value of Bitcoin. Well, I'm grateful to be with you guys. So, okay, redeem or redemption. So this is key for me, especially with what I do with redemptive economics. What does it mean? It means to gain or regain possession of something in exchange for payment, right? That's to redeem. Or it could mean to pay the necessary money to clear a debt, okay? Now, obviously, already from a Christian worldview, we can already see how these apply, right? So Jesus paid the penalty, if you will, made the payment in exchange for our sin, and he gave us his righteousness, right? So he regained possession of us as his people. Okay, that's obviously the Christian worldview there applied to this. And then to pay the necessary money to clear, of course, again, Jesus paid the debt that we couldn't pay, right? So that we are in right standing with God again. It can mean to buy the freedom of something. So slaves were redeemed, right? By people who would pay for their freedom to no longer have to be a slave anymore. Fourthly, to fulfill or carry out a pledge or a promise can be a redemption as well. And of course, we know that God did that very thing for us, that he carried out his promise from the very beginning in Genesis that he was saying he was going to do, he did through what Christ did on the cross, okay? And we actually just celebrated this through Easter, right? And I'm going to use actually the Easter message that I took in over Easter Sunday that was ironically very applicable to what I'm going to talk about today. So redemptive economics, this is my framework that I'm coming from as I speak to this, is this: God, through his sovereign will and the power of the Holy Spirit, is accomplishing his redemptive purposes in and through all of our economic choices. Okay? So every financial decision that we make, from how we build businesses to how we manage resources, and these choices either conflict with or contribute to God's redemptive purposes. Okay? So for the Christian, redemptive economics means participating in productive economic activities that, number one, add value and contribute to human flourishing. Number two, reflect the materiality of God's kingdom. And that just means it acknowledges God and his reign and rule over the universe and everything we are involved in here on earth. And number three, promotes God's redemptive purposes, right? So again, God is utilizing us by virtue of the empowerment of the Holy Spirit that he's placed inside of us to be ministers of reconciliation, right? With anybody that we're around. We are his ambassadors, as if we are pleading with everybody. Be reconciled to God is how it's said in Scripture. So that's kind of a framework about where I come from with regards to redemptive economics, okay? That kind of explains it for you, hopefully. Any questions about that? Make sense? Okay, cool. So here is one of the biggest issues with Bitcoin. This is one of the real challenges and issues when it comes to understanding Bitcoin. And that is that it is extremely multidisciplinary. Okay? It's not just a technology. There's more to it than that. So all these different spheres, and I haven't even included all of them I could put up here. These are kind of the main ones that I could think of at the time to kind of put up here. You've got math and engineering, economics, theology and ethics, philosophy and linguistics, all wrapped up and overlapping right at the center where Bitcoin is, which, by the way, is really, I could just take Bitcoin out and put the word money in there instead, okay? Because money, from a theological standpoint, I would recommend, if you want to learn more about this, I just put an episode out on my podcast about this on Wednesday. Money is the most profound, or one of the most profound biblical metaphors for the value of God's people. And not just the value, but the purpose that he uses us for, even, to be able to redeem the world through. It is a powerful, powerful metaphor. Sadly, money in our culture has been despised or dismissed through really terrible interpretations of Scripture when people say money is the root of all evil. Bad misinterpretation of Scripture. That's not what it says. But we've taken that and very much kind of embodied that and said money, bad, evil, maybe a necessary tool, but man, don't get caught up or else it's going to really do damage, right? And unfortunately, in doing that, we miss the profundity of what God's trying to communicate to us through the function of money, okay? So Bitcoin, and I think it's in my next slide, no, not yet, and I say this at a later slide, but Bitcoin to me is the only monetary protocol that abides by God's mandate for just weights and measures, okay? That's my base case, all right? Yes?
Repeat that sentence again, please.
Yeah. Bitcoin is the only monetary protocol that abides by God's mandate for just weights and measures. But the point is, money and Bitcoin, because I believe money and Bitcoin are very much overlapping or the same, very multidisciplinary. So if we come at it from only a math, engineering kind of technology standpoint, we miss a lot of what Bitcoin is about. If we only come from an economic standpoint, we miss a lot of what Bitcoin is about. This is also why it takes so long to understand Bitcoin. And there's a chart that I found that kind of illustrates this. Typically, in Bitcoin, this is what we say. If you study Bitcoin for an hour, yeah, it's cryptocurrency. That's what you'd say. You study Bitcoin for 10 hours, then you come to the conclusion usually, the government's going to stop it. Study Bitcoin for 100 hours, oh man, Bitcoin seems to be digital gold. 1,000 hours, Bitcoin is not crypto.
There's a big difference between the two. 10,000 hours, Bitcoin's going to free humanity, right? It's the most incredible invention that's ever been, right? And of course, free us from state control. So just to give you kind of an idea, the more you study Bitcoin, the more it grows on you. Let's put it that way, okay? So I want to start with this passage that was taught on Easter. And again, it relates very much to what I'm talking about today with Bitcoin and in the way that I believe Bitcoin functions in our society. So this is Matthew 21, where Jesus clears the temple. Right before this, you're going to see my pastor hat come out. Right before this, Jesus comes riding in on a donkey, right? Very confusing situation, by the way, because the waving of the palms and stuff were meant for somebody who'd be riding in on a white horse, the king who's going to take over and free everybody from the oppression of this other king. But instead he comes in on a donkey, which is more like humble, peaceful, and I'm sure there's some confusion about what's going on, okay? Right after he comes in on a donkey in Matthew 21, the very first thing that he does next is go into the temple and clear the temple. Again, very interesting. Comes in humbly on a donkey and then goes into the temple and starts overturning tables like a king who's taking over. Really interesting scenario here, but here it starts in verse 12. It says, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer. Very important piece there. But you are making it a den of robbers. This is a reference to Isaiah 56:7, where it talks about the fact that God's house should be a house for all nations, a house of prayer for all nations. So Israel was supposed to be the light to the world, right? They're supposed to be God's redemptive influence to the world, okay? Of course, they became very centralized and tight-fisted with what they had. You see this illustrated in Jonah very well. They didn't necessarily want to go out. And then not only that, but he's in the court of the Gentiles right now, which was a large area for those mostly who were not Jews could be. But what you see here is with the money changers, not only through the debasement of the currency, but other practices as well, they were putting up barriers between the Gentiles and God. And that's one of the reasons why God lost his mind when he came in and started flipping the tables right away. And then he goes on, he says, he finishes, but then this is amazing. The very next thing that happens, he clears the temple, everybody's out. What happens next? This is awesome. This is so cool. 14, the blind and the lame came to see him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things that he did, and what? Children shouting. That's horrible. That doesn't happen. Really big no-no. Really big. That's huge distraction. What Jesus is allowing to happen right now in this religious setting is very disruptive to everything that they've been trying to do up to this point, okay? Between all the riffraff of the blind and the lame who would typically be kept out, children were thought to be less than. I mean, they were the level of slaves or less, basically. And so for children to make a big deal and be shouting, I mean, it goes back to that other passage where they say, tell the children to shut up. And Jesus is like, no, tell them to come, right? So the children are shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David. They were indignant. So what you see right away as Jesus comes in and clears the temple, really interesting, a couple things. He came to, number one, to reclaim the temple, right? That was one of the first things that he came to do, and he did it humbly riding on a donkey. Number two, he came in to restore, and he invites the marginalized and the exploited, the ones who were kept at arm's length and kept out. Jesus came in, and by virtue of what he did, by kind of exploiting or expulsing those who were there before, he brought in those who were considered marginalized, exploited, and less than. And then, of course, eventually he becomes the replacement of the temple itself. He's the new temple, okay? So you guys are going to think I'm blasphemous. I see unbelievable comparisons to what Jesus does here and the impact and the redemptive impact that Bitcoin is having, okay? So Bitcoin, in a very similar way, Bitcoin came to reclaim, in a sense, very humble beginnings, almost like a tender shoot, should never have made it. The fact that it made it is nearly a miracle. Came to restore, and I'm going to show examples of this, by the way, where it literally, as Bitcoin comes in, it makes all sorts of room and space for the marginalized and the exploited. And then lastly, to replace dishonest money with honest money. Okay? I know, I'm making big claims here. You guys, I'm seeing it in your faces. I love it. All right, so again, Bitcoin is the only monetary protocol, I believe, that abides by God's mandate for just weights and measures, okay? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to compare Bitcoin with the dollar, all right? Do a comparison and contrast here with you. And then as we go through these different attributes, I'm going to provide illustrations of what's happening in the real world right now, okay? Literally around the globe. So first of all, Bitcoin is decentralized. You hear that probably all the time. Do you guys know what that means? Okay, can you explain it to me, someone?
There's no central entity in control.
Very good. Great. The dollar, on the other hand, is centralized, okay? So you have basically banks around the globe and around the United States who are in control of the dollar. Of course, you've got the central bank and the government that play a role in it, but it's very centralized, top-down control of the monetary system, the dollar, okay? Where Bitcoin is decentralized. Bitcoin is the only ever decentralized database. Never existed before, and nobody's ever been able to repeat it. Huge, really important. So here, and I said this before, but this is my personal perspective. The perception in our culture is that Bitcoin is a part of the whole of crypto. Reality is that Bitcoin stands on its own apart from other cryptos. Technically, yes, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency because it's run on cryptographic technology. We know that, right? However, the term crypto, as it's used broadly, what it describes is totally separate from what Bitcoin is, okay? And part of that reality is its decentralization. Because what you just said means that all other cryptocurrencies are not decentralized because there is a central point of authority, an issuing body or governance that's an organization or business or whatever that issues those tokens. Bitcoin doesn't have that, okay? The future, of course, this is Bitcoiners. They're, again, saying Bitcoin is the future, crypto's going away. That's their thought, okay? All right. So, secondly, Bitcoin is what's known as proof of work, where the dollar is proof of stake. You guys taught about what the difference between proof of work versus proof of stake is, right? Proof of stake would be, another way of describing it would be those who have a stake or an ownership in that monetary system get more say and carry heavier weight in terms of the decisions that are made about the monetary policy. Okay? Whereas proof of work is just simply, you have to do the work. You have to prove that you've done the work in order to earn the Bitcoin. Okay? And that happens through computers mining Bitcoin, which you guys have learned about, right? Okay. Jeff Booth, who's the author of The Price of Tomorrow, oh my gosh, if you have a chance to read this book, it is mind-blowing, amazing. He says that Bitcoin is an open, decentralized, secure protocol grounded in energy. Really important. That's where Bitcoin often gets a lot of attacks from people saying, oh, it uses too much energy. Nonsense. I'm not going to get into the details about that. That's an absolute lie. It does use a lot of energy, but it's a feature, not a bug. In fact, it holds the network accountable in many ways, and the participants in the network accountable to the protocol rules, okay? An open, decentralized, secure protocol. Protocol, really key here. not just some technology. Does anybody know what the difference or what a protocol is by any chance? Okay. It's a very hardened, rules-based software. Think of when you go onto the internet, what's the first thing you see on the left-hand side? Do you know the letters there? That's right. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's a protocol. Do you know any other protocols that we use for surfing the websites? No, right? Because typically a protocol is a winner-take-all because there's a network effect that is involved in it, which means that the more people use it, the stronger, more solidified it gets at doing the very one thing it's designed to do, only one thing. Same thing with email. Email as well is another protocol. There's a bunch of other protocols out there. And once they're hardened and the network effect takes effect, it basically cannot be hacked or attacked in any way. Layers on top can be, that's possible, but HTTPS, when is the last time you ever heard that ever being hacked? Because it pretty much hasn't. Same thing with email. However, Gmail, Hotmail, these other things are layers built on top of these very rules-based protocols. And those things sometimes, because they're centrally governed, can be attacked because there's a central point of failure, okay? But the protocol itself, because of the network effect, becomes very solid. Bitcoin was designed to be a protocol, okay? A protocol that helps to settle value in an immutable way, okay? Final immutable way. Anyway, okay. And then grounded in energy, which means it's grounded in reality. It's not proof of stake, where it's dependent on people's opinions and what they decide is best and all this kind of stuff. It's based on engineering, the rules of mathematics, okay? Galatians 6 says, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life." Very clear principle here with reaping and sowing, right? We hear this a lot. A man reaps what he sows. That's the key to being grounded in reality, grounded in energy, the rules of mathematics and engineering, which Bitcoin is grounded on via proof of work, okay? So it abides by another kind of biblical principle, which is you reap what you sow, okay? So here's the cool example. Oh my gosh, this gets me excited. Africa. They have real problems with infrastructure over there, especially power. I had a buddy who lives in Kenya come to visit us for several months, and he would tell me, it's so funny, we'd be driving on the highways and roads here in like the Pittsburgh area, and he would say, this is so funny, because they have terrible roads, and he would say, "Your government does such a good job," because he's so used to absolute potholes, like dirt, mud, no hard streets like we have, basically, okay? Well, the power grid is just as sketchy out there, okay? Really bad. Often they don't have power, or they might have power intermittently, right? So, and this is part of another slideshow where I talk about walking in the way of love, Ephesians 5:2. It talks about walking in the way of love. And I describe, it's been said before, that Bitcoin is love your neighbor money, because it abides by God's mandate for just weights and measures. This guy, Eric Hersman, is a missionary, grew up as a missionary kid, and then took over the mission in Africa from his parents, and continued to do that. And he noticed this problem. At the same time, he also noticed Bitcoin. And he noticed that how quickly folks in Africa were adopting Bitcoin because, and I'll share a little bit more about this later, because they've been under the thumb of monetary oppression for so long. As soon as they see something that gives them freedom, they're excited about it and they start adopting it, okay? However, he noticed that maybe Bitcoin might be able to solve this problem of energy issues and power issues over there. So what he decided to do after learning about Bitcoin is he would integrate Bitcoin mining into the power grids. The first thing this does is it elicits investments from people who want to make money from Bitcoin mining. So it incentivizes investment in some of the most isolated, poor areas of Africa because there's so much energy there. when they see the potential for Bitcoin mining with really cheap energy. That's the thing. Bitcoin mining incentivizes having to find this as cheap energy as possible, okay? And they find it there in Africa in droves. So they integrate Bitcoin mining into the power grid, which incentivizes the investment from outside people, which then brings, of course, reliable power, internet, and of course Bitcoin as well as its mined is being reinvested in some of these communities. Not only is it happening in Africa, it's happening in Guatemala, places like El Salvador, some of these third world developing countries. It's happening a lot now. The other thing that Bitcoin mining does, and this is really interesting, it stabilizes the power grid. So in any power grid, it has to produce way more power than is being used in order for us to go over and flick the lights off and on and the power to be there when we need it. Bitcoin miners help absorb all that wasted energy, which then stabilizes it, and then they can power down or power up immediately. So anytime if there's when the energy level usage is higher, they power down super quick, and it doesn't phase the grid, and they're able to gain the power very easily, okay? So it really helps to stabilize, and then when it's not being used, it sucks up all the extra available energy to mine Bitcoin, which is then invested into the community. So they get power, internet, of course, Bitcoin, which then and this is kind of a virtuous or redemptive cycle, I would say, that I've noticed here. So by virtue of that, as you get more Bitcoin miners out there who are producing Bitcoin, and in this case, stabilizing the grid, it also helps to secure the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network is the strongest, most secure computer network in the entire world that's ever existed, by far. And so what they're doing not only is benefiting them locally, but it's also benefiting the network as a whole, which then comes back around to benefit them again locally. So then, of course, adoption levels go up. Of course, the value of Bitcoin goes up as well as a result of this, which then incentivizes more investment back into these areas where there's exploited, marginalized populations. This is the coolest part, because Eric is a strong Christian, and what he loves to talk about is how he's literally bringing power and light to these communities and then sharing the gospel. Like, I'm getting chills thinking about that. Here, turn the lights on. Now let me tell you about the Father of lights, right? I mean, it is powerful what's happening there. And people are coming to faith through Bitcoin mining. Anyway, this is one of the most redemptive, cool things going on right now, mainly over in Kenya and in more isolated areas. So, okay, that's all the benefit of proof of work. You can't do that with proof of stake. So the dollar can't do that. The yen can't do that. The only monetary protocol that is able to have that kind of redemptive impact is Bitcoin. That's it. Because of the way it's designed. Because it's grounded in energy and reality, okay? It's open source and transparent, okay? You can see everything. Every transaction, it's all listed on there. It is like, if you think of a ledger, you guys know what a ledger is? Okay. If you go into your bank account online, it shows your ledger, all the debits and credits, right? Deposits, withdrawals, etc. And it shows you all those different things and where you stand financially, right? So this is an open source ledger that shows everything. Whereas the dollar is completely closed and ambiguous. Nobody knows what's going on behind the scenes. The Federal Reserve, I don't think has ever been audited. If it was in the early 20th century, maybe. But has not been audited for, decades and decades. Nobody knows what's going on there. Think about what's been talked about recently in politics with the gold and Fort Knox. It's another place that's never been audited, like for a long time has not been audited. We don't even know if we have the gold to back up what we say we have, right? We have no idea. But there is a centralized group of people, elites, that have this idea and think they know best and how to tell us what to do, basically. So Bitcoin is the opposite of that. Open source and completely transparent. It's permissionless. What does this mean? It means that you don't need permission to participate in it. There's no intermediary. There's no governing authority saying, yes, you may do this. Ethereum, sadly, to the chagrin of all of the miners that used to be mining Ethereum moved from proof of work to proof of stake. Now, it's an elite few at the top who own the most who get to make the rules and adjust the issuance policy as they see fit. So it's completely centralized and closed and permissioned, which means when there was mining of Ethereum, it was very hard to do it. You had to get permissioned and jump through all these hoops. With Bitcoin, it is much easier to mine Bitcoin. They're now making these little Bitcoin miners like this literally this size that people are plugging in, and they're making little tiny bits. But they're just excited to contribute to the decentralized nature of it, which is why they run them, help secure the network basically. But anybody can do it. Anybody can have access to Bitcoin, can buy it, can have interchange, economically with it. Whereas with the dollar, extremely permissioned and in many cases regulated, and people are prevented from participating in that. Matthew chapter 5, because this is one of the things, by the way, that a lot of people have a problem with, because they say this. They say, okay, that's great that anybody can use Bitcoin, but that means that it's got to be used by all these evil people too, right? All of the people who are, drug dealers, think of Silk Road, all these kind of people that are doing these negative things. It's a perfect money to be able to do really illicit, terrible things. Yes, that's exactly right, and that's the point. Matthew chapter 5, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If it's a true, honest money, it's going to be able to be utilized by anybody, no matter what your intentions are. And we have to be okay with that. In the same way, again, it reflects the heart of God in terms of being able to provide for everybody. This is one of the reasons why nearly 60% of all the Bitcoin are owned by individuals. By individuals. So this is crazy. 3.6% are corporations. 3.9% are Bitcoin ETFs. The government, or governments around the world, own only 2.7%. There's still 6.6% that need to be mined yet. 5.2% are in the Satoshi wallet, because he is the one who took the huge risk of starting to mine Bitcoin right out of the gate when it was worth nothing. Miners have 3.4%, and about 17 or 18% are lost. 57% are owned by individuals. I want to really drive this home to us as Americans. We don't realize this, but this is the global reality. The dollar is used in extremely exploitive ways all over the world against the marginalized and those who are in other developing countries. But what you're seeing is a lot of them are finding Bitcoin, and as a result, coming out from that exploitation. So why would we care about Bitcoin if we're America? We're the top dog. We don't care. We have the dollar. So we're more concerned about its practicality to us, right? Or its investment value to us. Whereas other countries, it's a very real thing to know the oppression, economic oppression of the dollar in their countries and other currencies as well. And this provides an unbelievable opportunity for them to escape that. Places like El Salvador and a whole bunch of other countries like Guatemala, Argentina, Venezuela, Kenya, Nigeria, these are the ones who are adopting Bitcoin faster than anybody, way faster than us in the United States. Yeah, Lake.
How does Bitcoin give people in rural communities and stuff, like you said, in Africa, how does that give them more financial freedom than just the dollar? Because you don't, the dollar anymore isn't just physically, you can have it on Cash App or Venmo or your bank account.
Right. Yeah. So it is used in ways, and there are details that I don't have time to get into right now, that keep people out of being able to actually participate in utilizing the dollar, okay, in other countries. Typically what will happen, like apps like Cash App, we have access to those. People in other countries don't. As a matter of fact, their countries will intentionally keep them out of that so that they, as the leaders of their country, can utilize it themselves, but they operate in incredible controls over their people and their countries, and so they don't have access to those digital resources that we do, if that makes any sense. So yes, some people who are maybe in the more elite may have some opportunities to utilize that, but not everybody. BlackRock did an interesting study recently, and this kind of speaks to the growth of Bitcoin. Its adoption rate is 20% faster than internet right now, and it's 43% faster than mobile phones. This technology is absolutely exploding right now, and it's exploding in ways that we, again, in the United States, don't understand because of where we sit in our position. So permissionless versus permissioned. Bitcoin is immutable. Again, a protocol, I talked about that, where the dollar is variable. They make up the rules as they go, decide how much they want to print or not print. So Bitcoin is censorship resistant. To that point that you just asked, or just brought up, Lake, I was able to take my iPhone, because my buddy from Kenya who was visiting went back to Kenya. He needed a cab fare to get from the airport, and I forget how much it was, but I think I took my phone. It was around $250 of just Bitcoin, pulled it up, brought up the QR code, held it up to my computer like this. His wife held her phone up instantaneously between them. No intermediary. That's the key, Lake. All those other apps, like you just mentioned, are intermediaries that have control of keeping people out, basically. With Bitcoin, it's completely peer-to-peer. There's no intermediary. There's no governing authority saying, yes, you may transact. No, you may not transact. And I was able to do it instantly. She got it within 30 seconds, took it, and was able to buy, transferred into their currency to buy cab fare. Scarce, like ultimately scarce. No more than 21 million will ever be mined. Whereas the dollar, as we know, is limitless right now. They just keep printing trillions and trillions and trillions more. And from an ethical, theological standpoint, they're defrauding everybody who has dollars by doing that. Because the only way to create something out of nothing is to defraud everybody else and steal from everybody else. Only God is able to create something out of nothing. And Bitcoin realizes that. So in many ways, Bitcoin bows a knee to those constraints that God has placed in the created order. James 4 says, and this is, again, going back to being scarce and or limitless. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you don't even know it will happen to you tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist. It's a mist. Here today and gone tomorrow. Super quick. You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Why are you thinking you can just make all these plans without acknowledging the Lord, right? This idea of being scarce or limitless, that scarcity reflects the reality of everybody's scarce energy. So it reflects God's created order. And then Proverbs 11:1, the Lord detests dishonest scales. That would be what the dollar is. It's a dishonest weight and measure. But accurate weights find favor with him. I would argue that Bitcoin is an accurate weight that finds favor with the Lord. So in conclusion, first of all, Bitcoin honors God's image reflected in mankind. Okay? It values the limited resources and energy that we galvanize to produce value for others. Okay? Number 2, the people, the state, or government utilizing honest money or Bitcoin are subject to God's rule and reign as reflected in the laws of creation, like I just mentioned, sowing and reaping. Thirdly, it becomes a store of value that empowers the most vulnerable and marginalized populations of our civilization. All over the world, it's playing that role right now. And then lastly, it promotes long-term thinking, a low time preference versus a high time preference. What you're seeing is people begin to save in Bitcoin and watch that value grow versus being sucked away from them through hyperinflation. It gives them margin to begin to start planning and thinking ahead and thinking generationally now. How do I start businesses in these, El Salvador and think about what I'm going to leave to my grandkids and great-grandkids and how they're going to be able to do the same through having this margin. Whereas when you're living hand to mouth trying to to scrape together every little bit you can because it's all being stolen from you, you don't have time to think about anything else.
Let's get to work!